Good morning, I'm Tanya Iser. I'm a senior investigative reporter. This morning I'm joined by our legal expert, Meredith Bagui, and senior crime and justice reporter, Rebecca Lopez. We are back for week 2 of the trial of former Uvalde Schools police officer Adrian Gonzales. He is charged with 29 counts of endangering a child, 19 of those for the children who died, and 10 of those for the children who were wounded during what happened at the Uvalde school, Robb Elementary. Last week we heard testimony from ballistics experts. We heard testimony from school teachers describing how they got the children off the playground, how they protected them, even descriptions of children grabbing safety scissors to try to protect themselves. And we also heard the prosecutors begin to lay out their contention that Adrian Gonzales should be held accountable for his actions that day. So let's take a listen to reporter Jobin Paniker as he describes what happened on the Friday at the trial.
4 days into trial, and we've already heard so much. Friday started with a complete breakdown of the scene, a window into the massacre. These are the photos inside and outside classrooms at Robb Elementary. Every fired round, every evidence marker. We heard from Texas Rangers and crime photographers.
Shot multiple rounds this way. We should see some defects over here.
Possibly.
All this evidence to help jurors decide whether former officer Adrian Gonzales failed as a first responder.
The person responsible for these defects and causing this damage is dead, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's not Adrian sitting at the table with us.
No, to my knowledge, no, absolutely not.
And you're correct, by the way.
But the most compelling and also heart-wrenching testimonies happened in the late part of the day.
That was a entrance wound of the chest.
The medical examiner who had to evaluate the fatal injuries of 21 victims. This evidence was shown in court only, not on the television feed, because it is too graphic. But you don't need to see the images to understand how horrific the evidence is.
In this case, 12 gunshot wounds were noted.
And finally, a mother of one of the fatal victims took the stand. She asked to protect her identity. Her child is Eliana Amaya Garcia. This mother lives with guilt from that day.
She wanted to come home. She asked if she could come home, but I told her no, to stay in school.
We have not heard from responding officers or dispatch recordings, nor seen body camera footage. Maybe next week. Also, the big question, will Adrian Gonzales testify? For WFAA, I'm Jobin Paniker.
And of course, that does remain the big question. Will Adrian Gonzales testify? You know, and when I was listening to that testimony on Friday, I think the most gut-wrenching thing was, hearing the descriptions of the wounds that these children had, and then you heard that mother, which puts it all in context.
Yeah, I talked to some of the reporters that were in the courtroom when they showed those photos, and what they did was they showed the pictures of the kids, and then the picture after they, during their autopsies, just the photos, and the children that had head wounds, they wrapped them up. But it was, I was told it was just gut-wrenching in there for everyone that was inside that courtroom. And I do think that we're going to hear from more parents coming up this week as well.
Meredith, why is it important for prosecutors to do this? How does that help make this case?
Well, they definitely have to identify the victims, so there's that part of it. But they also want to put a personal spin on it. They want to make sure that the jury understands that these are real children, real people in their community. They definitely, need to see that, and we do try to keep it to a minimum as far as like gore and violence, but it is important to have that connection throughout the record.
Yeah, and I can't imagine for the parents seeing those autopsy photos in court. I mean, that's something you cannot unsee.
And there are only a handful of families in there. I think a lot of them chose not to be there. And also, the defense attorneys tried to keep some of this evidence out because they felt that it's prejudicial to Adrian Gonzales getting a fair trial. And one of the things that they kept talking about during jury selection, during voir dire, was can you keep your emotions separate from what the law says? What did Adrian Gonzales, were his actions criminal, but don't confuse that with the emotion of what happened and who the real killer was. And the real killer is not on trial here. The person that actually killed all of those children is not on trial.
That's right, Meredith. They had a whole discussion earlier in the week, and I think it was in the pretrial hearings on Tuesday. They were talking about, talking about how you describe the victims, using the word victims, but being careful not to say that they are victims of Adrian Gonzales.
Right.
Not because the shooter obviously is the one that did this. In your mind, what do prosecutors have to do to make this case?
Well, they have to draw a very strong line between Adrian Gonzales's actions or failure to act and the harm that came onto these children. So they do have to go from there was a shooter, he was in the building, he certainly caused those injuries, but did Adrian Gonzales have a duty to go in there and try to distract or delay or to somehow mitigate that action, because that's what they've charged him with.
Do you think that if prosecutors keep going down this, showing all of the graphic nature of what happened here, I've spoken to a couple of people that think if Adrian Gonzales is convicted, that could at some point lead to an appeal as far as getting this trial getting turned over on appeal?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a possibility. I think that if they are trying to be too inflammatory or too much, certainly he did not cause those injuries. So if they're putting on too much of that, the appeals court would definitely look at that and say, that may just not be fair to him.
Well, and Rebecca was describing last week how during jury selection you had potential jurors that were saying, we want more cops on trial.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've covered a lot of jury selection, a lot of voir dire. I've never seen such an outspoken panel of jurors. I mean, they were asking him, the prosecutors were asking him, does anybody have any questions? I mean, and the paddles would all go up. And there was a lot of questioning of, well, why aren't more people on trial? Not only is he, and some people use the word coward, these are words from the jurors, the potential jurors, why is he the only one? There were, 300 more officers out there that also should be on trial for not doing anything that day.
Wow.
And Rebecca, but you've gotten a sense that if he's convicted, we could see more officers actually indicted, maybe. Do you think is that a possibility?
Well, that's one of the questions that one of the jurors asked, potential jurors asked, did y'all look at everyone? Have y'all looked at everyone? Are we done? And I think that the prosecutors left that a little bit open to see what happens. And of course, we still have the trial of Arredondo, the chief of police that was in charge. And one of the things I think that the defense attorneys are going to try to prove here too is Adrian Gonzales was the first responding officer, but at some point he was no longer in command of the scene. And I believe that the first responding officer is usually the person that takes charge. But once higher ranking people get there and there's a transfer of that power to someone else, Adrian Gonzales's responsibilities at that point were not to go into the school to make those decisions. That would have been put on the scene commander, and that would have been Arredondo. And Tanya, one of the things that is also troubling, there were a lot of higher ranking and more well-trained DPS troopers. There were federal agents out there. There were FBI, DEA. There were National Guard troops not far away. There was Border Patrol. I mean, half of the responding officers were Border Patrol agents as well. And obviously we know that it was their SWAT team that went in. But there's all these people with much more training than the Uvalde police officers. And you wonder, why aren't they on trial?
Right. I don't know. And I think there is, you and I agree, we've covered law enforcement for a long time. There is nothing about the police response out there that day that was acceptable. And I've yet to encounter a law enforcement official that we know that thinks it was. And we had James Hawthorne on Friday, and he is a former Cedar Hill ISD police chief. And what he was saying is that, yes, since Adrian Gonzales was the first police officer to arrive on that scene, by the training that they get, he was the incident commander. And he also said that there had to be an affirmative passing of that command. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know that ever happened, but ultimately once Arredondo gets there, he should be the one in charge. He's the police chief of that school. But you're right, we had tons of just dozens of people out there. You'll just never grasp why they didn't do something sooner.
And they're going to focus, my understanding, the prosecutors this week on training, on how was Adrian Gonzales trained. And he had actually just gone through training a few months, I believe, before this happened. So he did have training, and we all know that after Columbine, when the SWAT teams waited to go in and there were children being killed in Columbine, that everything changed in the United States when it came to law enforcement and what they needed to do, and it changed, and the training changed, and the standards changed, that you no longer wait. You get on, even if you have to jump around injured and wounded people, you don't stop to render aid. And in fact, that happened in a school shooting here at a college here in Dallas a couple years ago, where the responding officers, there was a wounded young lady, and they couldn't stop to render aid because the shooter was still out there. So they went after the shooter, and her family was upset because they didn't stop to render aid. But the training is, you have to stop the threat first. And so for every single one of these officers to have ignored that training is really troubling.
Well, because after Columbine, there was a recognition that with an active shooter in these kinds of cases, they have one goal, and that is to kill as many people as they can, as quickly as they can. And that's why you have to get in there, either take them out and kill them, or get them in custody. Either way, that's the only way you end the threat. And which does lead to those situations where you are passing by a victim in order to stop there from being more victims. Meredith, when the prosecutors start to play these body cams, if you were trying this case, what would you be attempting to do through those body cams and through training experts?
Well, the body cameras certainly are a really valuable tool that we have not had for many, many years. It's only been in the last decade or two that we've actually had so many body cameras, and they're so clear and high def. It really puts you in the perspective of that officer. You see almost everything that officer saw. So the jury's going to be able to really evaluate from Adrian Gonzales's perspective, and then from the other officers' perspectives, what exactly the situation looked like and how feasible it would have been for him to go in alone. What was the visual situation? Could he see all of the avenues to attack, or would he just be walking into an ambush? That kind of thing.
Right, and of course we have surveillance video, and the reason it appears that Adrian Gonzales is the only other officer charged, at least at this point, is because he is the first responding officer. Rebecca, are you getting the sense that they're mostly going to focus on what he did during that initial response?
That was one of the questions that came up in voir dire during jury selection, and so defense attorneys are saying again that the indictment, and I haven't read it all thoroughly in a while, but the indictment is basically what his actions were in the minutes before anyone entered the school, like the first initial reaction. So he's at that point then, after several people are in the school, then he can't be held accountable for everything else that happened. But prosecutors are going to try to say, they're painting the picture throughout the whole entire ordeal that was going on at the same time. So, but defense attorneys are going to say, listen, it stopped here. So, but
now, if you were defending Adrian Gonzales, what would you be attempting to do?
Well, yeah, I think what Rebecca said, limiting the testimony to just those few moments before any other officer responded, makes it a lot more narrow, and it makes it much more difficult for the prosecutors to keep it all on track and not go into the weeds and into the aftermath, if you will, of what happened. I would try to keep that narrowed down, focused, those few moments before the shooter went into the building. That's what he was supposed to react to, and what was he
What did he do, what he didn't do.
Right.
And defense attorneys are saying, look, he was on the other side of the school. He never saw the shooter. He never saw him because he responded to the opposite side of where the shooter went in, and so he couldn't stop him at that moment. And then they all entered the school at the same time, including Arredondo, all basically around the same time.
Which is why they didn't want the testimony of Stephanie Hale to come in.
Right.
Because Stephanie Hale is the teacher who testifies last week that she saw the shooter on the south side with a rifle, which of course led to this whole situation where she had not originally said that in her Texas Rangers statement, but had told the prosecutors that back in December. They didn't turn it over. It was exculpatory, and the judge ultimately threw that testimony out. Okay, so we had this hearing where they played the DPS recording of her testimony, and of course the judge threw it out. Can you really unring the bell?
No, I don't see how. I mean, jurors, even with the best of intentions, are going to remember that, and it's very difficult for anyone, I think, human beings, to be able to just cut that out and only listen to the rest of the evidence. And yeah, that was a total landmine for the defense, if that's their whole strategy, that he was on the other side of the building and he couldn't see the shooter, and then she comes out and says, oh no, he was right there. That is definitely very detrimental to their case, and I can understand why they fight so hard.
Yeah, and the judge was very clear when he brought her up before him and said, listen, we're going to exclude all of your testimony, but you did nothing wrong. This was not on you. Thank you for being brave and coming up, because it is difficult for all of these people to get up there. And then instructed the jury, you are to ignore everything, but don't ask or wonder why. You cannot hold it against either party. But then, yet on Friday, they had this whole sidebar about the pictures that they were going to show of the crime scene, and they agreed to which photos they were going to use. And one of the photos was where the shooter had written in blood, LOL. That photo was supposed to be excluded from the jury seeing that. Well, they agreed, and then lo and behold, it pops up. And so the defense was very upset about that, because they felt it was another violation of the rules.
So we had the situation with Stephanie Hale, then we had that. If with judges, how many times can you make mistakes?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the judge's decision ultimately, whether or not enough has happened to just corrupt that jury to the point where no reasonable person could be fair and impartial and be able to judge based on the facts and the evidence that was admitted. So it is a question.
Well, and we've had jurors be tearful, upset.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. The first 911 call at the funeral home, where one of the pastors that works there is crying and praying and like, oh my God, the children, he's going into the school. That had the entire courtroom in tears. And they did warn this jury before they were picked, your life is going to change. You're not going to be the same. You're going to hear some very horrible things. But again, you have to be able to set those feelings aside. I mean, I know that everybody wants justice for those children. Everybody wants to know, why help didn't come sooner. But you have to separate Adrian Gonzales from everybody else's response. And they likened this, I thought this was kind of interesting. If there's a bank robber and there's 5 of them robbing the bank at the same time, they're all culpable, but you're only going to try one bank robber. Right. So you have to focus on that one person and not the other 4 bank robbers. Mm-hmm. So that's how they're trying to explain it to the jury, why everybody else is not on trial. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it would be nearly impossible. I mean, in a case like this, you're right, you have to hone in on somebody.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like it becomes, just wild trying to. I guess that's why you wouldn't want to try Arredondo simultaneously with Adrian Gonzales.
No.
Okay, so I want to take a listen. Let's take a listen to testimony that we heard from the mother of one of the victims. This came at the end of the day. It was really the most compelling thing we heard, the most compelling testimony we heard from the mother of one of these children that died.